So, welcome everyone. We wanted to speak a little around presence. So, really, when we consider the nature of the spiritual path, we are considering this depth of what it is to truly be present here. Whatever techniques that we're using, really fundamentally, they're all pointing us towards this greater depth of a capacity to really authentically show up in life as who we are. And so when we look at love, when we look at awakening, when we look at embodiment, we are also exploring this. We're exploring what it is to, fundamentally speaking, be in a deep depth of intimate connection with ourselves, with others, and with all of life. And if we examine our issues in life, all of our issues really come from a place of not being present, from a place of being disconnected, disassociated, a place of feeling isolated or separate, a place of feeling closed down, a place of feeling that there is somehow an inability to meet life, to really be present with the reality of life as it is. And so just for a moment, just to drop into your heart and your spine. It's really that simple. There's nothing complicated about this whatsoever. It's really in the simplicity that we find presence. And we can enter into all of these different types of meditational journeys and experiences and states of expanded consciousness. And those can be beautiful journeys, but unless they really deepen us into this depth of presence, they're just another distraction, just something else for the mind to occupy itself with. And so when we're examining presence, we're also examining what it is to come back to simplicity, just to come back to what is here, and to actually be in connection with what is here. And so again, just inviting you just to sit in your spine, sit in your heart, and just notice what's here. Notice what happens when you come into connection with yourself. So much of our life is spent in a state of disconnection. And we're not even aware of that because it's just our normal state of being. But when we take the time, we can become aware of how so much of our life is spent avoiding what is here, or is spent trying to manipulate or fix or control or manage what is here. So much of our life is actually spent in resistance to life. And so presence is also a focus of how deeply we can be open. You can also look at this in terms of how open-hearted we can be, how surrendered we can be, how accepting we can be. We look at the path of healing, the path of spirituality. We can also look at it from this perspective. This perspective of how deeply it is that we are able to be surrendered, how deeply we are able to say yes to life, yes to ourselves, yes to what this moment contains. And of course, that can be extremely challenging at times, particularly within the world situation that we're currently experiencing as a collective. And yet, if we can really bring a depth of presence to that, if we can really bring our heart to that, our relationship to life changes. We're no longer in resistance or struggle with life. And again, this reiterates my earlier point in terms of how so much of our suffering, if not even all of our suffering, comes from this basic focus of a resistance to life, a fight with life, a fight with what is. Our mind's conditioned sense of what should be happening within life. Our egoic sense that somehow we know better than God or the divine. And so this depth of presence is also a deepening into what we could term as being true safety or true trust, to really allow ourselves to be open to the mystery of life, to be open to the unknown. And that's really where the magic happens. And when we remain in the known, we remain stuck within our comfort zones. We tend to simply live from out of our past, our habitual patterns of behavior. And so we're not really available to what is here and now, what is fresh in this moment. Presence is also a coming into a deeper depth of availability to what is here and now. Just sit with that for a moment. Just sit with what it is to really be open to that which is entirely new. Just to allow, just for this moment, all of those filters through which you experience life, based upon the past, to soften, fall away. To notice what is here if you're not coming from your past. Different traditions talk about this in different ways. I'm sure many of you have probably heard of the book by Eckhart Tolle, The Power of Now. This is also talking about presence, talking about what it is to live in the present moment, and about what it is to be present with reality as it actually is, and what that makes available. Within that place, there's actually the capacity for true connection, true intimacy. What happens when we truly meet one another, free from our projections, our ideas of one another. We could call that love. Of course, love is a very loaded word. As humans, we tend to project a lot of baggage onto that word. But if I had to describe love in the closest manner that I'm able to, I would say it's really what emerges when we're simply present, when we're seeing ourselves, when we're seeing life as it truly is. And so again, to reiterate how it is that all of our issues come from a place of not being present, because it's in that place that we experience ourselves as somehow being separate to life. We somehow see life as being other than what it truly is. I'm sure many of you are familiar with what is spoken about within terms of how it is that we become enmeshed within the stories of our lives. How it is that you can have a very different perspective on what life is to your next door neighbor, to the person down the street, based upon all of that past conditioning, all of that past history. And the story has its place. It's not to deny what has happened, but it is to recognize it for what it is, a pattern of past experience, the filter through which you are experiencing life. And when we really become present to what is here, that filter drops away, and we get to show up free of that. And we could also call that awakening, kind of awakening from out of our egoic sense of identity, out of our past, out of our story, and awakening to the reality of what life is. And then the whole process of how that is lived, which is embodiment, how it is that we live from this place of presence, how it is that when we find our conditioning, our past, pulling on us, we remain stable, grounded, anchored within what is awake to reality. And so how do we embody? How do we show up in the world from that place of presence? Really, it is a moment to moment thing. You can consider it in a manner of speaking as a kind of relationship that we have with what is awake within us. And the more we are able to commit to that relationship, the more we are able to truly surrender to that relationship, to give ourselves into that relationship with what is awake within us, the more embodied we become within that. So again, it also comes down to this question of surrender, this question of, are we truly willing to give ourselves to that which is awake, to give ourselves to reality? Or do we want the dream? Do we want the distraction? Do we simply want to continue to numb ourselves to life? And we can do that if we want to. It's a choice. All that's being presented here is another choice. A choice to show up, a choice to be present, a choice to awaken to what is here, and to discover what happens when you do that, how it is that life changes, what opens up in your life. And so that's a little brief sharing in terms of presence, and what it can begin to make available